Welcome to Session 4 in the UC Migration Webinar Series. I'm Rich Steves, Web Editor at TMC.
And I'm Alan Percy, Senior Director of Marketing at AudioCodes.
So what's the topic this time?
So Session 4 is about SIP trunking. It's about making the migration to adding SIP trunking for cost savings and many other advantages to a UC environment. There's obviously some technical challenges, but also some architectural challenges, and we're going to dive into that today along with an end-user case study from New Belgium Brewing.
And tell us about the presenters.
So we got two presenters, starting with Tarek Roddy. He's a Senior Program Manager from Microsoft. Tarek is a PMI, Certified Program Management Professional. He's got a master's degree in computer science. He worked at Alcatel for a number of years before coming to Microsoft. He's also a key person behind the Open Interoperability Program and designing the Lync interoperability tool. And he's a great presenter, and he's helped us out with a couple of sessions as part of our series here. Also joining us is our end-user case study is Travis Morrison. He's our Senior Systems Administrator for New Belgium Brewing. And New Belgium Brewing is a world-class craft brewery based in Fort Collins, Colorado, and is best known for its Fat Tire Amber Ale. Always a good thing to have available. And it's distributed widely to the western states in the U.S. Travis joined New Belgium Brewing in 2007 and is responsible for implementing and supporting the IT servers, network infrastructure, and of course their Microsoft Lync migration. So again, a unique opportunity to hear from an end user.
Absolutely. Let's hear what they have to say.
All right.
Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to present this topic to you today and share with you how SIP trunking can help you bring significant cost savings to enterprise customers. After this session, if you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My contact is shown here. Even though it's partner edition is in the title here, if you're an end user or an enterprise customer, this session should still be useful to you. It's only near the end that I slightly gear it towards current and potential partners for both AudioCodes and Microsoft. Before I go ahead here, I need to pop up this disclaimer. This presentation is provided as is and does not provide you with any legal rights to Microsoft intellectual property. Also note that this session is being recorded and that any feedback you provide may be used by Microsoft. There's a lot more details here. You can read that at your leisure. So the agenda for today is we'll be starting out with an overview of SIP trunking and provide a list of its benefits. This is mainly to address any possible terminology disconnects. It also helps us get on the same page. We will then talk about industry trends and expected returns on investment from the deployment of SIP trunking. Then I'll present to you three different SIP trunking deployment configurations that are recommended by Microsoft. This will be the main focus of my portion of today's session. We will wrap it up with an overview of the Lync qualification program and provide recommendations for non-qualified SIP trunking service providers to become Lync qualified. Now let's get started. To understand the main benefits of SIP trunking, let's start off with an example that doesn't use SIP trunking at all. In this diagram, you see a company that has two branches, A and B. Each of these branches wants to use a wide area network and a public switch telephony network for phone calls. So the company's IT department sets up two connections for each branch, an IP connection for the WAN and a BRI connection to the PSTN. This means that the company has to deal with two separate bills per branch. But at least now employees from different branches can talk to each other for free using VoIP over the WAN connection, just like so. And employees can receive and make calls from the PSTN. But each PRI line has 23 channels only. To handle 24 consecutive calls, a second PRI line needs to be added, just for that one extra call. This means that bandwidth is not always optimized. In addition to all this, the complexity at each branch will be high since the devices at the branches need to be able to handle protocol conversion from TDM to IP and vice versa. So here, those are some disadvantages. Now, what happens if the enterprise grows and builds branch C, for example? Two more connections are required, one to the PSTN and one for the WAN. What if more and more branches get added? What if a merger or acquisition happens with a company acquiring multiple branches at once, for example? The setup and management of these connections can become a daunting task. It becomes complicated, actually order of 2n fast. You can see how growth can become a burden on such a company. Let's say that the IT department can handle this cost and complexity. What about WAN connection resiliency? To implement resiliency between branches, the company's IT department would probably connect the branches in a one-on-one fashion, as shown here. As you can imagine, this again gets expensive and hard to manage very fast. What if the branch had only one connection to the service provider, and resiliency became the responsibility of the service provider? We would have a simpler network for sure, as you can see here. Guess what? Service providers can do this via SIP trunks. Not only that, but they can also provide enterprise customers with disaster recovery, such that if branch A, for example, goes down, incoming calls can be routed directly to branch B. So what really is SIP trunking, and how can it simplify a company's network costs while delivering enterprise features that customers need for mission-critical applications? To answer these questions, let's start with a quick overview of SIP trunking. SIP stands for Session Initiation Protocol. It's a core component of unified communications these days. In a nutshell, SIP trunking allows companies to replace physical PSTN trunks with virtual trunks that are deployed over a connection. SIP trunks can be built in one of three modes: a dedicated line, also referred to as a leased line, a shared connection, often using MPLS, or the public internet connection. For dedicated lines, these are actually the most reliable and most secure. VPN connections are not required with these dedicated lines. They also provide the highest call carrying capacity. The problem is they are also the most expensive option out there. Shared connections, on the other hand, are still secure, with VPN still not being required, but optional. However, excessive IP traffic in these connections can interfere with VoIP operations, unless VoIP traffic is given priority. Finally, public connections are the least expensive, but they're also the least secure, as you can imagine, requiring enterprises to use a VPN connection. This is also the least reliable mode and has the lowest call carrying capacity. Here are other terms that you might hear of for SIP trunking modes: managed and over the top. So how would a SIP trunking setup look like? Let's take a look. This diagram shows a typical setup. As you can see, a service provider uses a session border controller over here. So on the right, you have the customer and their site with a Lync server on-premise connection, and they have a DMZ, or demilitarized zone, with their router, their VPN router. And they have a SIP trunk connecting to the VPN router by the service provider, which hosts a network that allows calls to go to the third-party IPBX or to the service provider core network. The key point here is the SBC. This is to control signaling and media streams. SBC sits on the border of the two networks to protect and manage sessions. It really is analogous to the role of a firewall in data networks. SBCs also provide security against attacks, toll frauds, and UC threats in general. They also provide advanced features such as NAT traversal and quality of service by actually limiting and managing the call control and quality. As we discussed, deploying SIP trunks is a big step towards simplifying an organization's telecommunication infrastructure. Enterprises really get two birds with one stone, since SIP trunking also prepares them for the latest enhancements to real-time communications. So what do enterprise customers expect when they install a SIP trunk with Lync Server 2010? Actually, the Lync Server 2010 SIP trunking capabilities enables an enterprise user to make local or long-distance calls by using an E164 compliant number that is terminated on the PSTN. This can be done whether the user is inside or outside the corporate firewall. In addition, any PSTN subscriber can connect to an enterprise user inside or outside the corporate firewall by using a direct inward dialing number, sometimes referred to as DID. A richer set of voice features are often the primary motivation for deploying SIP trunking, but voice support alone is just the first step. For example, the SIP trunk that delivers telephone service and other VoIP communication services may now also provide enhanced presence detection for devices. It can also provide better integration with mobile phones, allowing customers to see when a user is on a mobile phone call, for example. Last but not least, E911. It enables authorities who answer 911 calls to determine the caller's location from his or her phone. So can enterprise customers expect any cost savings when they set up their SIP trunk? Absolutely. Overall, the cost savings associated with SIP trunking can be substantial. For example, long-distance calls typically cost much less through SIP trunking, and enterprise customers can also cut manageability costs and reduce the complexity of their deployments. Because SIP trunks connect directly to a service provider, they can eliminate their PSTN gateways. Last but not least, basic rate interface, which is referred to as BRI, and primary rate interface, referred to as PRI. The fees for those can be eliminated if enterprise customers connect a SIP trunk directly to the internet service provider. As you can see here, I have no PRI or BRI lines. With this, let's quickly summarize what SIP trunking enables. In summary, we've seen that it allows users to consolidate their network, and this translates primarily to simpler management of their network. We've seen how trunks can be aggregated, and aggregation of access is enabled. Also, we discussed briefly on-net calling. That means calling from one branch to another over the net and without incurring any costs. So this translates to free phone calls between the branches. And we also discussed briefly the possibilities of disaster recovery. And we mentioned that if branch A falls, incoming calls can be routed to branch B. Summary of the SIP trunking benefits we discussed is cost savings as the primary benefit, but also technology efficiency and feature extensibility. It basically enables you for greater and more capable features for unified communications. You need to realize that SIP trunking is still a growing area. Standards are still not complete. For the latest information about SIP trunking, I encourage you to view the SIP trunking forum, links of which are provided here. The good news is that this is no longer a technology we are just investigating. It's a technology that is proving itself day after day and has been deployed by many companies. However, don't think that SIP trunking is without its challenges. I refer you to a No Jitter article that talks about some of the pitfalls of SIP trunking that you can watch out for. It's an article by Gary Auden, president of Delphi Inc. But with these challenges, customers expect significant rewards. Let's talk about expected ROI for SIP trunking. Because SIP trunking results in those consolidated branch connections like we saw, customers can experience immediate cost savings with SIP trunking because they will only have to pay one bill. SIP trunking has payback periods that are as short as 6 months, making it a great investment in the current economic climate. With these savings, I'm actually including the entire installation, new hardware and all. One recent installation, which transitioned a nationwide network for medical facilities to SIP trunks, resulted in a 40% reduction in telephony costs and a very rapid payback. Empirical evidence from other installations confirms these results. Another example is that of Georgia Military College. After installing Microsoft Lync and gateways from AudioCodes and a SIP trunk from Broadvox, they saw an 80% reduction in recurring monthly charges. Not only that, they also saw great improvements in efficiencies. Another example is LA Fitness. Microsoft and IntelliPeer's SIP trunking service provided a stable and reliable communications solution for LA Fitness that resulted in a saving of over $500,000 a year in PBX lines, maintenance, and long distance. So how does SIP trunking achieve these cost savings? SIP trunking has several ways to impact the bottom line of an enterprise business. First, long-distance service typically costs significantly less with a SIP trunk connection. And if two branches are geographically distributed and both are connected to the same service provider, in-network cost will be zero. In addition, with SIP trunking, it is no longer necessary to purchase expensive basic rate interfaces or primary rate interfaces, those BRIs and PRIs that I talked about, allowing the user to buy just the capacity they need. This is a major cost savings since the enterprise no longer pays for unutilized capacity and can ramp up capacity for seasonal business peaks or staffing increases as necessary. Another example is in the efficient utilization of bandwidth and network capacity. Most companies have signed up for excess bandwidth than they really need to use. In some cases, the excess can be used to support voice traffic, allowing the enterprise to adopt SIP trunking without adding additional internet bandwidth. The use of IP makes it possible to cost-effectively use SIP trunks for multiple service providers, depending on optimal availability and the best rates, capitalized by geography, for example. By routing calls to the cheapest service provider based on country codes, significant savings can be achieved. The productivity benefits with SIP trunking are also significant, though less measurable. Once SIP trunking is deployed and the network upgraded to support it, a business has everything it needs in place to start using SIP applications. These SIP capabilities can be used within the corporate network. They can be extended outside the LAN also, allowing satellite offices, remote workers, and even customers to use VoIP and other forms of real-time communication and collaboration. In short, SIP trunking is one investment that is sure to be in demand in the leanest of economic times and will help customers in their quest to improve their bottom line. You might be asking yourself now, okay, I'm sold on SIP trunking and I understand what it does and I understand its benefits, so how should I deploy it for customers? Let's answer this question by first calling out three best practices with deploying SIP trunking with Lync. The first is to always use a Lync edge server to enable remote access and to connect to federated networks. The second is to always connect through an SBC. And finally, know the support story that you're getting yourself into and understand the roles of the three parties involved and what each party supports. The three parties I'm referring to in this case would be Microsoft, the service provider, and the customer. Based on who supports each piece, you end up with three configurations. We'll walk you through each of these configurations now. The first architecture is recommended as it provides the customer with a solution that is supported end-to-end by both Microsoft and the service provider. This architecture is also the least expensive, as the customer avoids the cost of buying and setting up an SBC. If you set up a dedicated connection between the service provider's SBC and the customer, then that should minimize security issues as well. Note that the term router here is used loosely. It's not a router that you go and buy from Best Buy. It could be a server with routing capabilities, and the transcoding here is a possibility if needed. Let us move on to another recommended deployment architecture. First, we slide the router over a bit as such, using it only to connect the Lync edge server to the service provider's MPLS network. Instead of using a router to connect the mediation server to the server provider's SBC, we install an on-premise SBC. This architecture requires more investment from the customer, but ensures a more secure connection with the service provider. In terms of support, again, this is supported end-to-end by both the service provider and Microsoft. Note that the service provider undergoes a separate qualification for this setup with Microsoft. Let us move on to the third and final recommended deployment architecture. First, we remove the SBC that we had, which communicated via TCP, UDP to both sides. We remove that. Instead, we add a Microsoft qualified on-premise gateway. This gateway communicates on one end via TCP to the mediation server, while communicating possibly with a different protocol to the SBC at the service provider's network. In this case, the customer is only using a Microsoft Lync qualified device, for example, an AudioCodes Mediant 1000, and is not using a Microsoft Lync qualified end-to-end solution. So Microsoft only supports the right-hand side, while the customer and the service provider will manage and support the left side. It is important to note that Microsoft supports only what it has tested and has confirmed to be working. In this case, the end-to-end solution with the service provider was not tested. Only the device was tested. That's why we clearly distinguish between qualified SBCs and qualified SIP trunks on our UC Qualification Program website, which I'll show you in a moment. To give you some background about the Lync Qualification Program at Microsoft, let me walk you through the process that you can follow as a partner to become a Microsoft Lync Qualified Partner. The process involves 4 main steps: sign up, self-test, formal tests, and formalization, and finally qualification. Microsoft currently provides partners with a tool to help them with their self-testing. And it's just a tool that partners can run at their freedom after downloading it, of course, from our website that they have to join. So they join this Microsoft Connect website, and they join a partner network and sign the appropriate NDAs. And then when they have access to the Connect site, they download that tool for testing. I can entertain questions in the Q&A about this tool because I helped develop this. After the partners run their tool and generate results, they sign up for formal testing. Their goal is to get qualified at the first attempt with these testing labs because it's quite expensive. Then finally, when all the results are in and they're past their qualification, they're posted on our website shown here. I would like to reiterate that our TechNet site is not only to list SIP trunk, qualified SIP trunks. It's also there for PBXs, and gateways, and SBCs. So here's actually what you see when you go to that website. So like I said, we also list IPBXs, SBAs, survivable branch appliances, session border controllers, SBCs, and we have a separate section for A911 as well. As a partner, you will need to undergo this testing for each device you want qualified. Not only that, but you'll need to revalidate with every single version upgrade of your software. AudioCodes has been one of our great partners, and as you can see here, several devices have undergone this rigorous process and have been qualified. The primary reason for this qualification is to stand behind the product, stand behind the solution end-to-end, if applicable, depending on the configuration, and provide customers with enterprise-grade quality. For the purpose of this session, we care more about Lync qualified SIP trunks. Let me expand on the SIP trunking tab. When you do that, you'll see that we have currently 34 plus qualified SIP trunking partners. Here's a list for your information. This is a big list and is growing. Because this is a live program, and we keep qualifying partners as we go. So when a customer asks Microsoft, which SIP trunking provider should I choose with Lync, our answer is typically, take a look at the Lync UC OIP page on TechNet and choose any one of the SIP trunking providers that are listed there as qualified for Lync. That is why I strongly encourage you to reach out and become Lync qualified if you have not already done so. As I wrap up here, I leave you with 3 calls to action. Always set up one of the recommended SIP trunking configurations. We talked about 3. Always ensure you set up only one for those for your enterprise customer. Make sure you qualify your solution with Microsoft Lync. and send questions to msucoip@microsoft.com regarding the UC Open Interop program. Oops.
It actually works pretty well, doesn't it?
Yep. Clicked on next here. Additional resources that are available for you and you will probably find useful are available here. The first session provides first link provides a deep drill down of SIP trunking. And I also recommend the case studies on our case study website and upcoming enterprise events also. There's Enterprise Connect, so several events. Here are some dates for upcoming SIP trunking related sessions that you probably might be interested in. With that, I thank you all for your time and for listening to me. And Alan, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Tarek. That was a great presentation. Appreciate you bringing that along. Next, we're going to spend a few minutes here and do a little interactive session here with Travis. So I'm going to ask Travis to unmute himself and join us here. So Travis, I did an introduction about you earlier. What I'd love to do is hear a little bit more about New Belgium Brewing. So maybe we could just spend a minute and introduce the company.
Sure. We're based in Colorado. We, as you said, make Fat Tire Amber Ale's our flagship beer. We've mainly been focused on the West Coast, but we've been growing significantly and have recently expanded to the East Coast. And we've recently announced that we're going to build another brewery in Asheville, North Carolina. So we currently only have the one manufacturing facility, but we're very shortly going to have two, which introduces a whole new set of opportunities for us. I think one of the key focuses that not many people know about our brewery is that we really focus on being a sustainable business. You know, that's we take waste streams and reuse them. We look for alternate energy sources. We purchase a lot of wind power. We use a lot of solar arrays. We have our own wastewater treatment plant on the back of the property that we're able to generate methane gas, and we have cogenerators, so we're able to provide a lot of our power, so much so that during peak times we're actually shifting power back to the city of Fort Collins power grid here in Colorado. So when we how does that tie into SIP? You know, for us, we want to use less stuff. You know, anytime we don't need to pull in an additional PRI, we can leverage the infrastructure we already have. We always kind of look for those efficiencies. So that's kind of how those tie in together. And we are a growing company. We're currently at 425 on the slide. We'll be by about 475 at the end of the year, and then with the expansion, you know, we're going to be adding, you know, 200 employees in one fell swoop. So, so SIP is definitely attractive for us.
Good, good. Let's move on and talk a little bit about your implementation, and then I've got a couple different slides in here. I might skip back to the network architecture when we get to it, but let's start out with talking about some of the challenges. When I went and visited your site a few months ago, we discussed a few challenges that New Belgium had when it came to its communications infrastructure. And let's just start with that and your choice of OCS and Lync.
Yeah, I think, you know, a quick background, I won't go into it too much, but, you know, we were a traditional TDM PBX back in 2006. In 2007, we started to implement an IP PBX, and roughly at the time, we had live communication server, and OCS R1 came out that year. We really liked what we saw in the product, so we implemented OCS with our IP PBX and use that as our soft phone. We have roughly a third of our workforce is remote in various states, and so we leveraged their laptop as their phone with headsets. Really liked what we saw when OCS R2 came out. We introduced that version, and at that point we moved our hosted conferencing to in-house to take advantage of the conferencing bridge in R2, and that's when we dipped our toe into SIP, so to speak. So all of our conferencing in OCS R2 was handled via SIP, and our traditional DIDs were handled via PRI. So as Lync came out, that was an opportunity to take a step further away from our IP PBX and go full length and full SIP. So right now, I think when we touch on the infrastructure slide, you'll see that we're running OCS R2 and Lync in parallel at this point, finishing up our Lync migration, and then we'll decommission our IP PBX as well as our R2 environment.
Right. So, as a matter of fact, when we talked, it was a matter of moving your users off the legacy system initially on the OCS R2, and then now you've moved a significant number of your folks over to Lync.
Correct. Everyone's back-ended by the Lync server now. It's basically just some client upgrades at this point.
Great. Great. So now let's talk about introducing SIP trunking. You chose Intelli here for your SIP trunking provider. Let's talk about how that's set up.
Yeah, Tarek kind of covered all the reasons and benefits of SIP trunking. We definitely looked at the efficiencies with the technology that we had. We're already thinking about our future expansion. Definitely the cost savings is there. Intelli, we know they're qualified with Microsoft through their program now, and so that's how we got introduced with the SIP trunking. We got an AudioCodes SBC, and then we did the mediation server directly on the hardware device, and we have basically a fairly simple infrastructure. The SIP trunking coming through our firewall to the router to the AudioCodes. With our edge server, so we have a basic setup. We're definitely small to medium size currently, but I think we're really going to see some advantages as we start to grow and add more locations.
Yeah, so the two quick things I wanted to make sure we included today. One of them, you shared a story with me about your rollout initially of Lync. I guess you said you had a presentation with a large group, and you got a unique response that you normally don't get when you do a rollout.
Yeah, this was actually back even a little further when we first introduced OCS. Brought up the client, introduced presence, saw how that was integrated in other applications we were using here in the Microsoft stack, and at the end of the presentation, people actually clapped. That was one of the few times IT actually got a standing ovation, I think.
Yeah, I bet that's true. So how's the experience been with moving to SIP trunking for New Belgium Brewing?
Well, for us, it was really nice. It's been a smooth transition. One, we were able to get comfortable with SIP in our conferencing bridge while still leveraging our PRI. And so that allowed us to really get comfortable with SIP, and then we're definitely on board. And with Lync, we're going full SIP and getting rid of our PRI. So I think an advantage for us was obviously running parallel environments allowed us to kind of play around and get comfortable. So we're really, once we can start getting local SIP numbers to all of our sales folks in different states and, really start taking advantage of some of the cost savings, we're excited about that.
And then maybe we'll wrap up the discussion with, what's next. You mentioned the expansion east. Is that going to impact your group?
Yes. So we're definitely, going to start ramping up on our East Coast location, and we definitely, SIP trunking is going to play a big part of that. And SBA is definitely going to play a part of that. It's easier when you focus on one environment, but now when you have to support two environments, redundancy can get very expensive. But I think we can have a lot of cost savings with SIP trunking a few pieces of hardware and still maintaining more of a hub and spoke deployment by hosting Lync at quote corporate here in Fort Collins.
Great. Well, I appreciate you spending a few minutes with us too. I also want to note to our viewers, and this link will be in some of our follow-up. Travis participated in a video interview that we did a couple of months ago, and we'll send that link out so you'll have an opportunity to hear more. So anyway, thanks, Travis. I appreciate it. Hopefully you stick around. I'm sure you're going to get some questions. We'll get to our Q&A session. So next, I'd like to move on and talk a little bit about our migration strategy from AudioCodes, and you'll see how Travis and a number of other companies have leveraged this strategy in their migration. And what we discover in many situations is that a business comes from an existing either TDM PBX or IP PBX, and they begin to deploy their Microsoft Lync infrastructure in an integrated fashion. In some cases, it's either on dedicated ports on their PBX or IP PBX, or it might be on the station side of a PBX. And while this certainly is one of the configurations, what we typically do is we nudge folks a little bit more forward to this next architecture. I'm sorry, with let me just move this here. Okay, moving the PSTN trunks over to the gateway. And what this becomes is what we call the drop and insert architecture. And the drop and insert architecture, by moving those PSTN trunks from the PBX over to the gateway, allows this integration now to occur between the PSTN trunks and the Lync server, and allows the traffic to be predetermined, based on which the ID number was dialed, whether or not the user is a Lync user or a PBX user. We can start to redirect the traffic, and this helps a little bit with the migration over to Lync. But one of the big benefits is when we start to integrate in SIP trunking, and this we're going to cover here in the next slide here. We're going to upgrade that box in the center there. We're going to make it be an enterprise session border controller. And then what we're going to do is integrate in SIP trunking services to that now enterprise session border controller. So what used to be a gateway providing basic integration to the PBX now has been upgraded with a software and in some cases some modules to an enterprise session border controller. And the real beauty of this addition or this strategy is that the users of the system are basically unaware of whether or not they're using TDM trunks or SIP trunking, and the administrators, like in Travis's case, can start to move traffic from their TDM trunks over to the SIP trunks as they feel comfortable with it. We do find some customers that just go overnight, flash cut, replace all their TDM trunks with SIP trunks, but typically what we find is a migration, and that migration in effect, moves calls over to the SIP trunks, which then essentially reduces their dependence on the PSTN trunking. And in some cases, they eliminate it altogether, and in other cases, they keep just the most basic connectivity, just maybe as a backup or in cases of E911 for their particular office or facility. So this migration strategy seems to be, a very valuable asset, and we've certainly designed some of our solutions around that. So next, I want to move on and just show you some of the devices that are available for this implementation. Our complement of Mediant 800, Mediant 1000, 2000, and 3000 platforms are part of what we call our Gateway&E-SBCHybrid category. And what this means is that this device can be initially ordered as a gateway and provide just basic integration, or it can act as an enhanced gateway, SBA, or in some cases, you might want to upgrade to a full-blown enterprise session border controller. And all 4 of these devices have that capability to start out as a basic gateway and then offer some type of enterprise session border controller. And really the difference between them is not only scale, but also whether or not they can act as a basic hybrid or enhanced gateway with an optional embedded mediation server. So this, again, we think is a important set of building blocks that really help with that migration you've seen, in addition to the solutions you saw in our case study examples. Another new member to the family we wanted to share with you today is our new Mediant 4000. This is an enterprise session border controller only platform that AudioCodes has recently introduced. And this is really a nice mix of sort of the old and the new. It's based on common hardware platform that the Mediant 1000 used for a chassis with some slight adjustments and changes. But it also adds some new micro TCA technology to enable a much higher density enterprise session border controller. And by giving up on some of the TDM functionality or gateway functionality, we're able to then increase the scaling upwards of 4,000 sessions. So this fills that hole between the Mediant 1000 and large session border controllers that might occur in the marketplace. And again, it's based on the same enterprise session border controller software, similar user interface and management interface, something that's very familiar to a lot of our customers. And again, fits the mid-market up to the contact center with its larger scaling. Another thing I wanted to remind you of, as Trek noted earlier in his presentation, is how important it is to have the support infrastructure in place to build your solutions. And one of the assets that we have is our AudioCodes 360-degree support program for our partners. What this means is that while you may be new to Microsoft Lync and some of the challenges that might be facing in deploying Lync, you've got somebody that you can stand behind you that's done dozens, if not hundreds, of these implementations. And as you can imagine, we've seen it all, and our support group has tremendous experience in this front. And by choosing a 360-degree support plan for your end customers, you have the knowledge of much experience behind them to help you with your implementations, and it's highly recommended as you get going in that. Next, I want to spend a moment or two and talk about where we're going with the webinar series. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to move on next to part 5, which is our UC mobility discussion. We're going to talk about the Microsoft mobile client, and we're also going to talk about our voice-enabled client, and talk about some of the differences and when each one fits into some of the customer deployments. We've also be joined by a couple great presenters. Pascal's going to return. You remember him hopefully from one of our earlier sessions. He's also Senior Program Manager at Microsoft. And also we're going to have Benjamin Tissato from Conquest Technology Services here to discuss some of his customer case studies and best practices from his experience in deploying mobility in Lync environments. And of course, I'll be back to present and host the event. Now for the good part. I know most of you folks have been eagerly awaiting for an opportunity to submit your survey results and get to some of the Q&A. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the survey to the desktop, to your desktop, and if you could just take a few minutes. This is, as you know, a short survey. Should look familiar if you've been on one of our sessions previous. A couple quick notes. Take a moment or two to respond to it here while we get started on the Q&A. And if you could please use the same email address for your response here as you used when you originally registered. That will make sure that you get credit for attending today's session. They're eligible. We've noticed a few people responding to the survey but not attending the sessions, and so we figured out a way to close that loop. Anyway, so a couple questions have popped in here. One is the universal always first question, which is how do I get a copy of the slides? And we'll be uploading them onto our website very soon after the session, and by tomorrow morning we'll send out a tweet in a LinkedIn note that gives you a URL directly to those slides. Towards the end of the week, we'll send out a follow-up email that will include not only the slides but a link to the recording that you can share with your other friends and other contacts. So I guess with that, I'm just going to remind everyone, if you'd like to ask a question, either to Tarek or to Travis, feel free to use the Q&A tab, enter your question in there, and submit it from at that point. So one quick question that did come in advance is, what about multiple simultaneous SIP trunking providers? I know this pops up occasionally. We run into it occasionally. So Tarek, I just was going to ask, start with you. You know, have you seen a situation where a customer has leveraged multiple SIP trunking providers, and how do they accommodate that?
From my experience, usually it's one SIP trunking provider. I haven't seen a need for multiple. Usually SIP trunking providers are able to handle additional bandwidth as customers grow. And if there are issues with a particular provider, yes, some customers switch to another one, but that has been very rare because we undergo strict qualification program with each of our SIP trunking providers, and I haven't seen that actually.
Okay, well, interesting. Okay. And just, I don't know, Travis, you know, in your situation, you've moved over your traffic over to IntelliPeer. Have you been able to you know, fully migrate yet, or you know, roughly what percentage have you migrated your traffic?
Yeah, we're you know, we're still actually using two different SIP providers. However, we have two different audio code devices that those trunks are terminating to, as well as the PRI. So we haven't tried to integrate two SIP different providers into one. For us, really, we wanted to get into one of our providers is obviously a Microsoft qualified provider, and the other is not. And so we're trying to get migrate into a single one, you know, for compliance and supportability reasons. But we haven't experienced any issues.
Okay, good. So Darren asked a question here. It says, can you clarify the Lync certification SIP trunking providers relative to, it sounds like, you know, our certification SIP trunking providers? And maybe Tarek, we're just going to start with you just for a moment and maybe summarize again the model of end-to-end versus the gateway model, and then I'll sort of dig into a little bit deeper after that.
Sure. Would you like me to share the slides again, or that will take away from the survey? So maybe, I can just speak to it.
Yeah, just speak to it if you don't mind.
Yeah. So in some cases, we just qualify a device, like for example the AudioCodes Mediant 1000 or 2000. We with AudioCodes or the partner providing the device, we work with them to qualify the device standalone. So basically, we send it SIP messages, and we expect some responses, and we go through this qualification process, see what fails, what passes. If things fail and cannot be qualified, we work with the partner to have them upgrade the firmware or fix the bugs. And then when the device is finally qualified, we say, okay, we support Lync 2010 with this device. And that's why in our UCOIP page, we have direct SIP devices listed separately and SBCs listed separately. So it's not tested end-to-end with a particular SIP trunking provider. But in other cases where we do have a SIP trunking provider coming in with their SBC and their configuration, we test with the SIP trunk. So in that case, we think of the SIP trunk as a device because we're really connecting to the SBC. And we do the similar kind of tests we did with the gateway, and that in the example I just mentioned. And then when you validate it end-to-end, you say, okay, this SIP trunk works with Microsoft Lync 2010. So now an enterprise customer can sign up for a qualified SIP trunking provider, which uses their SBC, which was qualified with Microsoft, or just uses an on-premise gateway, which again was qualified with Microsoft, and manages the connection with the SIP trunking provider. And because we haven't really tested it end to end, we can't really support it. But we're available for questions, but it's not really a formally supported environment. For Microsoft, the term support really means it has been formally tested and verified and confirmed. Many times I've seen configurations that actually work, but weren't tested by Microsoft. So it's not really supported by Microsoft, even though it works. So you have to distinguish between the two, working scenario versus a supported scenario.
Yeah, and that situation where there's a non-supported SIP trunking provider, we run into that situation, and certainly we support those situations, and that's one of the benefits of our the back-to-back user agent that's built into the ESBCs.
Yep.
We can integrate in, and where we run into those situations is in certain geographies or certain contractual relationships where either a partner or an end customer has a relationship with a SIP trunking provider who has not either yet gone through the Microsoft certification program or is in the process of doing that. Yeah. Frankly, I've not run into a situation. I've not heard of a situation. We've not been able to get it to work. But again, it's something that we at AudioCodes have to support that relationship, and that certainly would come with part of our support package. So.
Yeah, and we encourage our partners like you and others who find themselves in this situation to recommend to the SIP trunking provider to go through this process of qualification with the Lync 2010. It could be a fast process if they've already tested their SIP trunk in the field, and it typically costs between $14,000 to $20,000 per instance of this qualification program. And I highly recommend SIP trunking providers to undergo this process and get it qualified. Just check the mark if it works.
Right, right. A couple questions here. Believe it or not, a little disruption here, a little on the survey. If looks like a number of you have been able to respond to it. Maybe a couple of you have had some issues with it. By the way, we'll leave the survey open through the end of the month. So if you're listening to the recording, as long as you log your entry in before the end of May, you'll be qualified for the drawing, and we'll do the drawing at the last day of May. So again, either if you want to circle back around, or if you want to, if you're listening to the recording, you still have an opportunity to participate in the survey. Let's see, we're going to do one more question, and then then we're going to wrap up here with some content here. Just see a good one here. It says, what about bandwidth per concurrent call? So, Tarek, I'm going to ask you for that, and then we'll see if we can answer the question there.
That's a good question. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer to that because it's primarily dependent on the user's use case and what they want to achieve. Bandwidth has to be able to match the use case scenario, how many concurrent calls they need. But I think the question here is per single call, how much bandwidth is required? Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that, and I don't think it's just a summation, a simple summation. There is also some overhead included, such as handshaking and stay alive messages and all that. So I think the person asking this question is Michael. Feel free to send me an email, and I can follow up with additional details.
Right, and we also too will make sure our follow-up email includes all the contact information for all the presenters. And then to that specific question, in general, for a G711 call, we recommend at least 96 kilobits per second. The payload is 64 kilobits per second, but of course, like you mentioned, there's some overhead, and 96 is a sort of average, but at a minimum average. It's not uncommon for folks to spec much higher numbers, and also to over-engineer the circuit to be able to handle bursts beyond their contracted number of concurrent calls. And some of the service providers actually support that, which is where you can go beyond your concurrent and then of course, there's additional billing that goes along with that.
Yeah, for peak times, for example, the holiday season, and you need to handle a larger influx of orders coming in from customers. So yeah, you can subscribe to your service provider to handle those additional calls during a small period of time and pay the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, Tom here sort of points out as a suggestion. Again, sort of roughly 9600K for voice only, certainly when you get into more complex UC environments, that number goes up significantly. Matter of fact, it's interesting, Enterprise Connect, there's a lot of discussion about video as a medium for collaboration, and you can imagine the numbers skyrocket with video and desktop sharing, so much higher numbers for that. So.
But we give priority to audio connections in general. If you have, for example, too many video or app sharing that's degrading the call quality, as part of Lync, Lync has this CAC, call admission control, which it handles, throttles different connections, giving priority to voice over video.
Right. Good. All right, so we're at the top of the hour here, so just a couple of other resources I wanted to point out here. Certainly, we wanted to point you folks to our dedicated Lync landing page on audiocodes.com/Lync. There's lots of resources there, white papers and the previous recorded webinars and videos, all plenty of materials. And if you'd like to actually eyeball us, a couple different opportunities. One coming up here in June is at Microsoft TechEd North America. In Orlando, we'll be in booth 1949, and we look forward to having you folks stop by and say hello there. We've got a pretty neat little promotion for in-customer case studies, so I highly encourage you to stop by and visit, have a conversation with us about end customers that we've promotion. The second thing, too, is we'll also, for your partners, we'll be at Microsoft WPC. Matter of fact, one of my coworkers is feverishly selecting our booth number for that as we host this webinar, and we look forward to folks seeing us there. In addition to that, too, there's our social media outlet. You can either follow AudioCodes or you can follow me at Alan D. Percy, and be happy to engage you folks on LinkedIn or in Twitter. As we move to sort of social media. And with that, I want to first of all say thanks to our listeners. I appreciate you spending some time with us today, and thanks to our presenters for sharing your content. Tarek and Travis, I really appreciate you spending the chunk of the day today and preparing the materials. I know it was a lot of work, and it was very much appreciated. And also to behind the scenes, Nancy, thanks for helping out as our facilitator. And we hope to see you next month's event. Until then, we look forward to your thoughts and comments. Again, either email or via Twitter. Again, this program is copyright 2012. AudioCodes, no reproduction or rebroadcast of the recording without explicit permission. And I hope everyone has a great day. And thanks again.
Thank you, Alan.
All right, well, that was some really great information.
Yes, especially nice to have an end user actually tell their story.
Definitely. So what can we expect in the next session?
So the next session is about mobility. And obviously businesses, if they migrate to Lync, they start to think about, oh, how do I take this on the road? So we're going to, in the next session, talk in detail about the process and what's involved in adding mobility to their Lync environment.
Definitely an important and worthwhile topic. You should check it out.